Well, folks, this is it. This is chapter 7 of 7, the 7th episode on the series that we've done with Shane Mahoney about wild harvest in his work through the Wild Harvest Initiative. In this one, we talk about wild harvest beyond North America. We talk about wild harvest with people that maybe we often don't think about. We talk about wild harvest in terms of a generational thing and what's going to happen down the road. There's a lot of things that this wild harvest impacts about our society and our culture that maybe we either take for granted or we just don't have cause to think about it. Well, in this last episode, Shane's going to give you a lot to think about. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this series. And if you do, I hope you'll share it with people. Shane, when we talk about wild harvest, in my head anyhow, I kind of think of just hunters and anglers, but as you've mentioned, there's actually a whole community built around or engaged in wild harvest, and we tend to kind of see little narrow pieces of it, but hunters have a role in that, but it's a pretty big community.
It is a big community, and it's very diverse, and part of why it's so diverse is that there is room in this wild harvesting, of course, for many cultures, including cultures of people who are coming to the United States and Canada from other parts of the world who bring their cultures with them. I mean, we have our own harvesting of wild mushrooms, for example, developed in our own cultures here. But of course, many European cultures, that's an iconic kind of activity.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Extremely much so. And so, of course, when they come into a new country, and they find that kind of familiar outlet for time in the outdoors, I'm sure it's a wonderful experience for them. They may be, if they haven't hunted before, find it obviously somewhat more challenging to move into the hunting space. There's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more to figure out. There's a lot more to acquire. But certainly with wild fungi, they were immediately able to jump right in. But if you look across the spectrum of the things that we harvest currently from nature, it is extraordinary. I mean, we think of hunting and angling. They are big activities. They involve a lot of people, and obviously they have deep historical roots in our countries. But, you know, we have people who harvest medicinal plants, and indeed not just individual peoples or local people who have an understanding of those plants and the benefits they bring. But of course, the harvest of medicinal plants is a huge business because from those wild plants, many of the pharmaceuticals that we in fact utilize in the world, and as a matter of fact, the majority of them actually come from plants in the wild, and derivatives of the chemicals that are in those become the pharmaceuticals that we use. So that's an enormously important wild harvest, of course. And it only comes from those wild species. We obviously have harvests of wild honey. We have harvest of maple syrup. We have harvest of wild leeks. We have harvest of wild rices. We have harvest of wild flowers. We have harvest of berries. We have harvest of fruits. We have harvest of nuts. And we have harvest of things like Christmas trees, firewood. We have harvest of shed antlers, and some of these things, like the shed antler harvest, of course, has gone from a kind of small-scale, activity that almost anybody could run out any time and participate in, to something that became of such size that, of course, it had to be regulated, and as you well know, it is now worth a great deal of money collectively to a lot of people. And it takes a lot of time and investment by people to become experts at finding these, very appropriate antlers for the purposes they are used for. We also, of course, have something that you see in artisan shops that deal with the creation of, things like salad bowls and other interesting formations, coffee tables and so on, made out of really, distorted, kind of the stumps and twisted knots and so on and so forth. So when you start to think about what we harvest from nature, and we haven't even talked about, of course, fresh water, but that's another thing that we take, and fresh air. There is, in fact, an enormously diverse community, and this is something of critical importance, in my view, to the future of hunting and angling. Those two activities have a certain number of critics associated with them that for one reason or another feel those activities are inappropriate. Not as many people are offended at harvesting mushrooms or things of that nature. And I think we need to identify hunting and angling not as exceptional enterprises, but as enterprises that fit within a lifestyle that involves use of the outdoors and harvesting from the outdoors. One of the great mistakes that the hunting community in particular has made, in my view, over the last 20 to 25 years, when the first great pressures from anti-hunting organizations and so on came to bear, was that we immediately went to a kind of a defensive reaction and attempted to more or less show that hunting was some sort of absolutely extraordinary, unique kind of an event. And it was almost and at that time, I may use the word, it was almost a priesthood, because there weren't as many women involved in hunting as there are today. And that was a terrible mistake. This is an old saw of mine again. The second great mistake we made was marrying ourselves with television. There are some good things that have come out of the television work of late. There has been a tremendous amount of damage done to hunting by the television shows in general that were developed over the last 25 years. Yep. And I thought those two things were wrong. We're getting better at the television shows now. I really do believe that. I think we're coming out of that era of the show as many kill shots as you can, because that's what people want to see, and along the way destroy our image amongst the general public. Thank you very much for all the television shows that did that to us. Yeah. And we've come into a phase where we're much more sensitive and show hunting in a proper light. Yeah. But still, I think the successful strategy for hunting is to place it within a matrix of other activities of wild harvesting in nature that the vast, vast majority of people agree with. Yeah. I'm a berry picker, Randy. You're a hunter. Yep. Someone else here in this room is maybe an angler, and someone else may be simply somebody who is deeply interested in harvesting medicinal plants because they have ideas about home pharmaceuticals and home treatment of illnesses or whatever it might be. The most important point about this eclectic community of people is, of course, it helps in a political sense to identify the activities collectively as something that touches all kinds of peoples in the African American community, people in the white Anglo-Saxon community, people in the Latino community, immigrants from all over who may participate in the activities, etc. You know, this is again, I made this point earlier, it is very easy, if you think about it, to understand how this wild harvesting business, in quotation marks, can help build communities and help build understanding and help build, better relationships between people. Because two families, let's say one is from Southeast Asia, three families, one is from Southeast Asia, one is from Bavaria, and one is from the United States of America. And the two families who are not from the United States have moved here, and all three find themselves of the same day in the same general area harvesting wild mushrooms. Yeah. Now, there is absolutely no question that whether they speak a word to one another or not, there are connections of mutual identity and respect and understanding that are emerging in the very act of being together in that harvesting. Yeah. So I think the ultimate objective for the Wild Harvest Initiative, of course, is to take this way beyond hunting and angling and to include all of those natural harvesting activities that we are conducting, and indeed to go even further and to look at people who like to home garden and what they like to contribute, and people who are raising livestock who are trying to give the animals they raise the greatest possible natural lives as possible. I mean, there's many ripples that will run out from the Wild Harvest Initiative, which is why I say, if we can develop the capacity to mobilize the information we have and to mobilize ranges of research that will contribute even more information and more and new interpretations to this has the capacity to be a game changer in North American conservation.
Yeah. So with that wide community, I come from mostly this hunting space, but I embrace, and as you're rattling off all those things, it's like, yeah, I do some of that, I do some of this. I can relate to all that, and I think the larger the community, the greater the acceptance of of the things that are dear to me,
Yeah.
hunting.
Yeah.
I've always thought, as just, maybe it's because I'm the student of the history of conservation, that hunters had a role in leading some of this and came up with some pretty good ideas and approaches along the way.
Yeah.
I guess the question becomes is, what role do hunters play in that leadership today with this big community, with some of the pressures we face?
Well, I think hunters, they led for a specific reason at a specific time, and in total credit to the hunting community, it wasn't a splash in a pan. It wasn't just when we started to turn the corner to try to recover these diminished populations. We stayed the course and, developed all these agencies and nonprofit organizations and various mechanisms to continue supporting. I don't think it's a question that the energy and the role and the efforts of hunters should be diminished. Quite the contrary. I think what ought to happen here is that the hunting community ought to be taking a much wider view of not only the idea of harvesting, but taking, and seriously taking, not just people berry pick. No, that's not what I am talking about. Take a serious view of those other harvesting activities and realize that this is the opportunity to build a community of harvesters in which everyone will be stronger and everyone's activities will be better protected. I also think that the hunters need to realize, however, that they are not the only powerful force for conservation in North America. There are other powerful forces for conservation. And some days I think we need just a little bit more. Some days I think we need a lot more humility about how we project ourselves and how we talk about other dimensions in the conservation space. Yeah. There may still be some people in Canada or the United States who might want to look upon John Muir as some kind of, frivolous, pretender or something in the conservation space. But that is simply and totally not true, of course. His views were very different from ours, but he made massive contributions.
Right.
And the other thing about this wild harvest community, to bring this back, this point of conservation leadership and so on and so forth. So we have 12.5 million American hunters in this country, and 3 million or so in Canada, and we have many more anglers. And overall, I think in the two countries we might have something like 40-odd thousand people who participate, 40-odd million people who participate in hunting and angling. But if you expand that out to the number of people who berry pick and the number of people who harvest mushrooms and the number of people who look for medicinal plants and wild leeks and wild rices,
bird watching,
all those kinds of things, we have the numbers to be an extraordinary political force, and a political force in favor of the environment. I think the most cohesive components of that broader, more eclectic conservation community can actually be identified and solidified around this idea of wild harvesting, food and other products that we're taking for productive use for people. And this is a long-term thing, Randy. It will not happen in the next 5 years or whatever. But it's the kind of thing that if we could, again, get people to look at landscapes with a different lens, that is a great area for producing wild mushrooms. That is a great area for producing wildflowers. That is a great area over there where if you look carefully you can find really significant medicinal plants. That is a great place to hunt elk, and down there in that river is a tremendous chance to hook, rainbows and cutthroats and brook trout and whatever one is pursuing. And that's the way we should look at these lands, as I've said before. And it shouldn't just be us, the users, who look at these lands. I mean, ultimately, what we want to do is tell the politicians in our countries to look at the lands this way and treat them this way and develop legislation that protects them in this way.
Yeah. Well, you touched on the numbers of hunters. In terms of numbers, hunters in the U.S. and in Canada. Yeah. There's often people who will say, well, my place is so crowded, or it never used to be this crowded. Or so as we have displacement, we have changes of land use that force hunters to have to go to other locations. We get some of that. But back to some of our other discussions about true raw numbers and supportable numbers. We seem to struggle with getting a hard number for how many hunters are there in the U.S.? How many hunters are there in Canada? Is that number increasing? Is it stable? Is it decreasing? Is there a place where that truly exists?
There's two parts to that question. I mean, the one is that you can find lots of numbers, which is your first point. There's no doubt you can Google, turn on your Googler, as a friend of mine says. Turn on your Googler, and you can you can find these numbers, and you can find a source for them. It comes from National Shooting Sports Foundation or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or whatever the case may be. But what you have to realize is that the numbers are all generated in a certain way. It's not that everybody goes out necessarily and sort of counts, every single hunter. Then there are conditions and parameters put on the data as it's collected, such as, did you hunt this year? Or it may be a question, have you hunted in the last 5 years or something like that? And of course, depending on where you fit in the scale of some of those questions, you may well have hunted 5 years ago, but you may not have hunted any time in the last 4.
Right.
All of those kinds of questions become difficult to deliver, really finite, concrete numbers from. The second part of this is that, a lot of this data is generated through surveys. So, you sample, a group of people in one way or another, and then you assume based on, the metrics you have back from that on average, that group, chosen randomly, is going to provide the kind of assessment that I can scale up to the wider population.
Yep.
But of course, there's going to be variability around that. Not everybody who answers your phone call or your email is going to say, I'm a hunter. Some are going to say, I'm not. And if you do it over a number of areas, there's going to be differences between areas. And so now all of a sudden you have a number that has a fair amount of variability around it. And most people are going to take the number that's put out there without thinking about, the ranges that are involved here. Then you have circumstances like what happened during COVID. You have all of a sudden, and there could be other examples of this, but this is a recent one, where you have a COVID phenomenon take place, and all of a sudden you get a lot of people saying, hey, maybe I should do some fishing. Maybe I should try to get my own food.
Right.
And that's a very positive thing in one way from our perspective of trying to bring people into the activity and make that activity relevant to more and more people. But on the other hand, nothing says that burst of enthusiasm will last.
Yeah.
It's like when we were kids, we used to take sport. Unfortunately, now looking at it as a man, we used to take sport at throwing rocks at jellyfish off the wharves of Newfoundland. But it was one of those activities that little boys tired of very quickly. You could only throw so many rocks at so many jellyfish, and then you moved on from there. This could be the case with people who have moved into the hunting and angling space as a result of COVID.
Right.
They may just get tired of throwing rocks at jellyfish and go back to their normal activities. So I'm not so sure where that's going to end, but our next wave of data gathering, by the way, is going to gather the data on those years, and so it'll be interesting. But the point I raise here is that you also have to take a longer-term view. If you have a number that says today there are this many hunters in the United States, the only way that number makes any sense is if you were able to put that into perspective of what has happened in the past, and also hopefully to be able to put it in the perspective of what may happen in the future.
Right.
And Conservation Visions is working already on a pretty significant piece of work now to delve into all of that for the very reason you raise, that we need to have the sort of golden reference. We need to have the place where people can go, this is what it is, this is how it was derived, and this is the best there is, and this is the safest one for us all to use. Because another thing that happens with this is somebody publishes a popular article in a small magazine, a small outlet. They don't have the time to give the caveats, the explanations of things, or they're rushed, to get it in on a certain point in time, or the quality is not as high as it might be, quality control, whatever. And you can actually have mistakes reported. That wasn't actually the total number of hunters. That was actually the total number of duck hunters, or it was something of this nature. So we need to clean up some of that. And, this all sits as a kind of another skin around the Wild Harvest Initiative, where, if we are going to be able to speak effectively about the amount of food, we clearly have to be able to speak effectively about the number of hunters and anglers who are bringing, and others who are bringing that food in.
Yeah. And the other part of that gets to, hunting happens over the course of a lifetime for most people. And the phases they go through and their level of involvement and engagement and what they have for disposable time and income to participate and to what degree and how philanthropic they feel. Measuring just the total number of licenses sold, well, there's some relevance to that, but if you're like me, I buy licenses in 11 states. So do I get counted 11 times? Mm-hmm. So those numbers are what they're going to be reported. For me, and you've always done a good job of using an example to this, you call it the big lump going through a snake. Yeah. But if this number, wherever that bell curve is, keeps sliding out here further and further and further, it's not like we're going to have this lineal, static growth or slow movements in it. We're going to get to this point where all of a sudden the bell curve is to this age where people just get out of it.
Yeah.
And then we've got this big blank spot. Yeah. It's kind of like a pipeline where you run 50 gallons through it. And it's great when the 50 gallons comes out, but then what do you do? So do we have any information about the age, the demographics of the U.S. and Canada?
We do, and we have more for the United States than we have for Canada. At least it's more accessible. There's another issue of accessibility of data, raw data. People will give you the output numbers, but getting the raw data is very difficult, which is something we're dealing with in our fish documentation in Canada right now. But you're absolutely true. There's two factors that will lead to a sustainable future for hunting. One is the overall numbers of people who are there, because it's critical. You can't just have 0.00001% of the population hunting and hope that you're going to maintain it. Yeah. Because the industries that support it, the activities, the laws, the legislation, they just won't be there. So numbers matter. But what also matters tremendously in terms of sustainability of the hunting culture is what we call the demographic makeup, the age category makeup of those numbers. So we are all somewhat familiar with the massive declines that have occurred continentally in caribou populations in the last 10 to 20 years. These have almost in every case, certainly in the vast majority of cases, have resulted from a demographic issue ultimately that's caused by something we call density dependence. Too many caribou existed on the land. The forage became depleted. The females started to reproduce at a later age. They started to produce calves that were born at smaller body weight. Those calves were much more susceptible to predators early and to entering the wintertime in a reduced state of condition and size because they were born later. They had less time to gather nutrition to do it. And overall what happens is you still have a pile of animals out there. They still look okay to you. But what's really happening is you are having less and less recruitment, of course, because your babies are small, you're missing pregnancies, and the babies that are born are dying at greater rates. But at the same time, of course, your adult caribou are getting older and older and older, and they eventually at 14, 16, 18, they simply die. And so ultimately what happens is the number of new that are surviving to enter the population is insufficient to offset the number that are dying and leaving because of senescence and old age. And that carries on for a period of time until suddenly you see these massive changes that occur in herds, going from numbers of 750,000 down to 12,000. And what you see in that pattern further is that the big decline, you can see the declines coming from 750 to 400 to 350 to 280 and so on over a period of 10 years, 12, 15 years. But then all of a sudden, as you get at this far end, where this pattern I've described has become extreme, now you get this, what I call the lemming effect, and it really just plummets. So all of a sudden you got a couple of 100,000 animals, and then 2 years later you count, you say, well, where did they go? They're all gone. We only have 12,000. Well, they were all getting to the age when they were all going to die. Yeah. We know that we have this phenomenon occurring in the hunting community. There's no question. It is not at a point where that the lemming effect will take place in the next 3 to 4 years. But in the next 20 years, we are definitely toying with the real possibility that this is going to happen. Yeah. And the implications of that happening are severe across a great many fronts. And of course, there have been numerous efforts made to try to address this question. Right. The question there is whether or not the numerous efforts being made are being effective. Yeah. That's the challenge.
So before we jump into what those efforts are, do you think we adequately appreciate how limiting the ability of our agencies, of our organizations, to with a much lower number of hunters and supporters, that's going to put a serious crimp on the engines we've built that affect and put this conservation on the landscape and keep it intact, which allows for this wild harvest. Do you think we adequately appreciate what that risk could be?
No, I don't think we adequately. I mean, I think it's like all phenomena like this. There are some people who worry about it every day and understand it, and there's lots of others who just, there's always a percentage in society on anything, whether it's an economic downturn or whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a certain political power that they don't like that are in power. They tend to have this view that it will all pass and it will all be fine. And there's an element of that. Sometimes I wish I was one of those people, but I prefer to deal with data. I prefer to deal with reality and what I know is inevitable. And I know if all the hunters die, there are no hunters. That's kind of clear to me. So I do worry about this, and you're absolutely right. It would completely change the makeup and the format and the delivery systems and the program priorities and so on of our state agencies. And some people who are critics of our state agencies might say, hey, that's great. That's exactly what we've been waiting for. So glad these things happened. But of course, they are not necessarily thinking about what the long-term implications would be either. Yeah. We have to have people who deal with very significant, difficult questions of access and how to ensure that we have migration corridors in place for animals. We have to have significant abilities, even on the national level, to be able to coordinate between countries for migratory species. We have to be able to manage habitats with very complicated series of regulations and intrusions between public and private lands and all these kinds of complications that people are faced with every day. And we have the enormous complexity of climate change and the enormous complexity of endangered species and their recovery, the incredibly difficult decisions to be made about industrial development and its impact on biodiversity and how we gauge that, how we measure it, how we don't stop it altogether, but we only allow it to proceed at a rate that's going to be beneficial. People walking down the street or going in to get their tag for their pronghorn, they're not necessarily thinking about all of that, right. And I don't expect them to. Yeah. But that is exactly what's humming and drumming away inside the building they enter and all the little offices where people are doing all the things they are doing. Yeah. And so if you pull out of that the basic, not only the financial infrastructure because you don't have hunters, you pull out the voice, the advocacy, even the pain in the ass voice that hunters often are, You pull that out and all of a sudden the agency is no longer pushed and pulled by these kinds of things. And it turns into something else. Now the question that people ought to be asking themselves are two, what do you want out of a completely revised system where perhaps there might be less hunters and less anglers and more people who do other things? And what are you expecting your agencies to do in those circumstances when those are the realities of the day? And who is going to take care of the incredibly difficult questions of human-wildlife conflict, motor vehicle collisions, depredation on farm landscapes, disease transmission, all those kinds of things. So I think you worry about a very significant problem, Randy, that We may see some adjustment for if RAWA passes, because large amounts of money will become available.
Right.
But we don't want a world where there is none of what we have and we just have RAWA. The dream of the people who have supported that activity, that legislation, all of them, from the Blue Ribbon Panel all down to state agency personnel and others, people like myself, people like you, we want that to happen, and we want a strong hunting, angling, foraging community at the same time. Yep. That's what we want. We want it all, because if we have it all, we have a stronger program for nature, a stronger program for conservation, and a stronger program for healthy lifestyles for people.
Yeah. No, it's not binary. No. We can have more than just one or the other.
Yeah.
One of the responses when this first started coming out 20 years ago, people were saying, hey, iceberg dead ahead, look at the age, look at the lump going through the snake, as you often say.
Yeah.
And in 20, 30 years, there's going to be this aging of the hunting community, and are we bringing enough, as you talked about, replacing and recruitment to the numbers? And so they came up with the acronym R3, recruit, retain, reactivate. New hunters, keep the ones you got, and reactivate the ones you've lost. It's come under heavy criticism in the last couple of years in the West as things have become crowded, and we've seen big demographic shifts in the United States where a lot of people are moving to the sparsely populated West. There's only so much opportunity to go around. There's so much accessible land. Oh, it's all crowded. This is a train wreck. You're ruining my hunting. Da 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 da. I laugh at that, and I don't laugh at it, but I marvel at how we try to take a very complex issue and we want to just simplify it to something. Well, here's the problem: you're recruiting too many hunters. I wish it was that simple.
Yes.
You think about all the things that go into that. We're seeing population declines of our mule deer that 30 years ago we could have never imagined. We're seeing drought. We're seeing all kinds of things that are reducing opportunity, and that creates competition for the remaining scarce opportunity. So everyone wants to point a finger at R3 or whatever recruitment or retention program you want to talk about. I would almost say there's maybe some instances where we could say R3 hasn't been as effective as we would have wanted it to be. And know that there's going to be some critics who are hair on fire, like, what do you mean? There were 4 trucks at the trailhead this morning. I used to have this place to myself.
Yeah.
So it seems that as much as there might be some criticisms out there, we need to be doing an even better job in thinking outside the box and expanding our view of how do we bring this next group along? How do we fill in that the caribou calves are replacing the ones, as you explained in your trend, are replacing those who are going to fall off the chart someday?
Yeah. Well, we do have to pay attention to the problem because, as we've already covered, the problem is severe. It freights an enormous amount of implications. And furthermore, it freights an enormous amount of fundamental change. And fundamental change is something that scares people. Human beings are not good at fundamental change. They're fairly good at small change. They can change a job, they can change a partner, they can change a truck. They can change a city. They can take on a new hobby. They can get new friends. So, predictable small-scale changes are something, in fact, that human beings find quite stimulating and helpful. But large, complicated changes that suddenly impact many aspects of a person's life and move it from a point A all the way over to a point E, F, G, or H, that's something that tends to result in a great deal of tension, argument, and a lot of unproductive name-calling and blaming in many cases to say that someone must be responsible for this massive change in the world. And it obviously wasn't me because I was living at home watching soap operas, or all I do is watch sports on TV, so I couldn't possibly have been able to have influenced this. When in fact we are all part, of course, of that cumulative change. I think that we have to address this issue of recruitment. But I've always felt that what we have to do is start, just as we must start with the whole issue of hunting itself. The one thing that is, I think, equally important to the opponent of hunting, and which is equally important or critical to the person who wishes to keep hunting alive, is the issue of motivation. The individual or group that are, purposefully, ideologically perhaps opposed to hunting, are very often not actually focusing on the animals themselves, although that's part of the equation.
Right.
They are largely, if you pay careful attention to the rhetoric, and this is psychologically understandable, I know why it is this way, they are really, if you listen carefully, they are really questioning the motivation of the hunter.
Right.
Why would a person do this to any animal, for example? Well, that same question is very relevant, isn't it, when we start to think about bringing new people into hunting.
Right.
It's exactly the same question. And these things are not thought about in this way. At least I've never heard people articulate them this way, but this is how I see them. The first question is to a young boy or a young girl or an older boy or an older girl or a man or a woman, well, why would you want to enter this activity? And I believe that the why of entering the activity has, of course, a certain level of flexibility about it. Some people's why will be slightly different than other people's why. But I also think there can be a longitudinal difference in why people may have started to do it when they did it in the 1920s versus the why of why they might start to do it in 2022.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with family structure. It has a lot to do with social structure. It has a lot to do with social values and so on. When a boy or a girl entered hunting in the 1920s, it was pretty much guaranteed that 100% of the process that took place was usually a father, because most often it was a father, or an uncle, or some other respected male figure in their family, local circuit, was the individual who inspired them to come and be part of it. Mm-hmm. Now, what was it that motivated them? Part of what motivated them, and this is all information that you will not find written anywhere, I don't think, Randy. I read a lot looking for it. But part of the motivation for those children to become involved is they loved their father, or they loved their Uncle Bill, or they loved going to visit Uncle Randy and Aunt May, who had a farm, and he hunted, and he took them out sometimes to hunt ducks or something of this nature. Their motivation, in part, was to be like him. And we come full speed to a point today where most young people, some have the benefit of that familial touch, and it's still their dad or their mom, or their dad and mom go together, or it's an aunt who's, oh wow, my aunt's a great hunter, or my uncle is, and she's so cool, or he's so cool, or whatever, and so part of that emotionality is buried in the motivation of the child or the young person or the young adult to enter this fray. A difference between 22 and 2022, 1922 and 2022, is that there was very few negative reactions to encounter by that young person who wanted to be a part of that. They didn't go to school the next day and say, hey, my Uncle Dick took me out and we went duck hunting yesterday and we got one, They didn't then have, significant numbers of their friends and family, or not family, but their friends in school turn around and say, well, that's a pretty barbaric thing to do. Or the chances of that happening were pretty low.
Yeah.
Today's world, 2022, there are real chances that is going to be what they meet, particularly as you move away from the rural, iconic hunting areas and into other places.
Right.
As you move away to university and meet a much more wide distribution of viewpoints on all of these kinds of things. And so that means that your motivation, even though it may have started with an uncle or someone still to this day, will be challenged by that. But in most cases today, you're not going to have that kind of mentorship.
Right.
You are going to join up, possibly with your mom or your dad, and you're going to join up to some program, a hunter education program, and I've produced films for lots of them. And that's where you'll go to learn how to shoot and what calibers are and how to game dress animals and how you should feel about the taking of an animal's life and all this kind of stuff. And that is fundamentally different. You may then have the opportunity to hunt with somebody else for a while, but this idea of this regular kind of familial engagement with people you've known, often representing generational input, let's face it, that is a hell of a lot rarer today than it used to be.
Yeah.
And it ain't going to become any more common any time in the future.
No, that trend is going this direction.
So now you have programs that develop, and they're well-intentioned, and they try to get at the issues, but they are not necessarily based in these kinds of reasonings and rationales. And I believe, without being hypercritical, that unless you have this understanding as a basis for what you're going to do and design, you cannot have realistic expectations of what your program is going to do. Because take the 1922 student of hunting, they immediately, as soon as they develop their skills and they can buy a permit and they can hunt, first with a .22, maybe then with a shotgun, maybe eventually going to a more high-powered rifle, they're all that time meeting with people, in the community and talking to people and talking at home and talking to Granddad and talking to Uncle Jack and all this kind of stuff. And, and the dogs are with them all the time. And, this is a cultural cauldron in which people are bubbling around like vegetables, and taking all the essence from the broth, and shift that to 2022.
Right.
You have, enormous numbers of challenges of where you can hunt, who's going to take you there, when it's a hassle to get there, and so on and so forth. How frequently are you going to be able to do this in modern time? Are you going to face criticisms from your friends? You're a young male, and of the 8 billion people in the world, you can only see one girl. And that's the only human being that really matters on the planet. Your parents don't matter momentarily, and your sisters and brothers don't matter momentarily. And maybe she thinks that's a terrible thing. Yeah. That was much less likely to occur in 1922. It's more likely to occur today. And so all of those things are in the mix. And the one thing I can say that comes out of all of that I believe has been a challenge for the standardized programs that we have brought forward to try to solve this problem of recruiting hunters and so on and so forth, is that we tend to have expectations, those of us, I wasn't one of them, but people who did set it up, so I'll speak in those terms, those of us who set up these programs, we had the memories of the past.
Yeah.
We also, however, had deep down inside us expectations of the past. Mm-hmm. We thought that if we could give people the understanding and the permitting and the licensing, get them to pass the test and be legitimate, that somehow the social circumstances would put its arms around them and bring them into something that would allow it to go on in the way that it had gone on in the past for those who were teaching it. And this, to me, was a major flaw.
Yeah.
And so, in the end, we have to realize that we have to find something in society that is going to motivate young people in 2022, when I say young people, maybe 18 or 16 to 35, let's say, it's going to motivate them in this incredibly competitive world where phones are buzzing and a million options are open to them relative to what was open to us as children, where they are going to be so motivated that they are going to want to come into this space and take up the heavy lifting curve that's necessary to become a good hunter.
Yeah.
I believe, and one of the reasons I created the Wild Harvest Initiative was because I believe it is essentially about motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that a lot of people who are not hunters are clearly providing what I would call an adjacent motivation. The adjacent motivation is healthy food, food that they know the source of, food that has not been manipulated by pesticides or fungicides or, growth hormones or whatever it might be. And so I see that as the way, and we're already proving, in fact, the data is beginning to show that is why people are coming into this space. Talk to people in backcountry hunters and anglers and other entities. You have your own experiences, many of them, Randy.
Yep.
I have my own experiences. I have the people who call me, the people who write me, just like you, the out of the blue phone calls by young people I've never met to, ask about this and this. I don't want to do it for any other reason. I want to do it for food. I want to do it for food. So I think that whatever programs we have in place, R3 and otherwise, we have to recognize that unless our programs are tied to the realities of the social dynamics and motivations of today, they will not work. They cannot be brought to fruition based on the beliefs and hopes, no matter how passionately held, of people who expect 100-year-old experience to be translated into today. How often in these discussions have I had people say, well, when I went to school, I used to put my shotgun, in the back of the bus, and nobody said a word to me.
Yeah.
Or, I'd get on my bus, man, with my .22, and there was absolutely no problem with this. But you know what? You now live in a country that has a mass shooting more than once a day.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just use that without being political about that issue to say, surely that alone is going to change whether or not a young person or any person is going to get on a bus with a firearm.
Right.
So we've come a long way. Wouldn't it be great if we were still in a circumstance where children everywhere could play freely and you never had to worry about some kook or crackpot, stealing them away from you? Wouldn't it be great if children today could come to school and knew how to be careful around firearms, or could take it on the bus and get dropped off halfway and hunt a few ducks on the way home? Yes, the answer to all that is absolutely yes. It would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
But is it realistic?
No, it is not today.
No.
So, well, when you talk about motivation, for me as someone who is trying to create messaging around those motivations, it was the reason I left outdoor TV. And this isn't to kick on outdoor TV per se as an activity, but at the time we were not allowed to show the processing, which comes with this reconciliation of these difficult emotions.
Yep.
And in spite of every effort of trying to do that and trying to get it in there, it would get thrown back. No, this is against production guidelines. Someone will be offended.
Yep.
So our largest communication tool for 20 years was TV. Mm-hmm. And that communication tool said, we are not going to show this motivation of food. We're not going to allow you to show reconciling this difficult emotion of something you love and cherish, a wild thing, has now died at your hands. Mm-hmm. And you're going to convert that to your food.
That's funny, because they were certainly heavily encouraging kill shots for a long period of time.
Right.
Wow.
So
that's an insight.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we get to show it you know, the very simplistic man versus nature approach.
Yeah.
Stand there, you know, look at me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the real part of hunting, which is my motivation, I came to hunting through food,
Yeah.
through adventure, through the mental and the spiritual health of being in the wild places.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to show any of that.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, we are making some changes in the messaging.
We are.
But those things you talk about of motivation have to be expressed in whatever message and communication we provide.
Totally true. That's
And
my
if we
point.
fail to do that and we just want to make it this simplistic thing,
Yep.
once you get into motivation, it's more of a man versus himself or a woman versus herself, trying to understand this and explain to themselves, why am I doing this?
Sure,
Because
of course, yeah.
the first inspection of a motivation comes from within
Yep.
before it ever gets inspected
It
from
should.
outer.
It should, yeah.
And those are complicated messages to express, but we can do them.
Well, we're going
have to do them.
We're going to have to do them, because if not, we're going to spend enormous amounts of money and run in circles.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. And, you know, we have to experiment. I mean, maybe the Wild Harvest Initiative is an experiment that will not bring the fruits that we hope. I believe firmly it will. I believe it's too much in line with the social progress and social norms of today not to succeed. And I know why most people are going into hunting today. I feel I understand that very well. And I know also what motivation for hunting the broad public who doesn't hunt is willing to accept.
Yep.
And that is this issue of food. So I think we need lots of good programs, but we need all good programs to try to think about these questions. Motivation is the critical issue that both the pro and the antagonistic viewer of hunting is most concerned about. And we need to find the motivation that can build the greatest possible support on both sides of that aisle. And that, Randy, is wild food.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It is food.
Yep.
It has been for me.
Yep.
And people would say, Randy, it's anecdotal for you. I get, I don't know how many thousands of emails I get in a year.
Well, it's not anecdotal that 97% of hunters in Texas share their wild food. That's no longer an anecdote. That comes from hard data. It's no longer the fact that they reach 5.8 million other people in Texas other than themselves with their wild meat. That's not an anecdote anymore. We're starting to get beyond the Shane Mahoney personal story and the Randy Newberg personal story. And that's what this program is designed to do.
And that's why I'm so interested and supportive of seeing you take that forward. Mm-hmm. Because it is not the anecdote anymore.
No.
This is years of just intense effort and work. And
the best way to understand the Wild Harvest Initiative is a lot of other programs. I would say the vast, vast majority of all of the programs we've ever launched are at best effective defenses. Mm-hmm. What I've developed here, I believe, is the relentless offense.
Yeah. No,
this is
I
the
agree.
relentless offense for hunting, I believe. I really, truly do believe that. It's going to be a long, long time before I can envisage a society in the United States or Canada who says, we are totally against the hunting of wildlife, even if people are using it for food. I think we're a long, long way from that.
Yeah,
and as we get more and more people, the likelihood of that is less and less, as far as I'm concerned, to happen. Yeah.
Anytime you embark on I don't know, well, you call it an initiative, Wild Harvest Initiative. You can call it a campaign. You can call it a movement.
Life crisis.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. You're in effect advocating for a change.
Yes.
Either you're advocating for issues or you're advocating for a group of people who those issues are important to. Mm-hmm. Is there a simple explanation of what Wild Harvest Initiative is advocating for and for whom?
Well, yes, it's advocating, first of all, for everyone. I'm a firm believer that the planet belongs to us all. I don't care. I mean, we have to deal with geopolitical boundaries, whether it's a person's fence or whether it's the the geographic limits as defined for a country. Yes, we have to deal with that in some respectful way. But the planet belongs to us all, just as it belongs to all grizzly bears and all great whales and all seabirds and all butterflies. It belongs to all of us. And we are the ones who must live here, and we are the ones, particularly the human animal, are the ones who must care for it. So my advocacy is for a life spent in association with nature, and that can mean visiting nature, it can mean thinking about nature, it can mean reading about nature, it can mean sort of miniaturizing nature in our home gardens. It can have a lot of methods to it. But I am advocating for that because, I believe that most of our ills have come from the fact that we have drastically modified the norms of human biology, going all the way from, placing vast numbers of us in very, very small spaces, sticking us in vertical boxes in places where the lights never go out and where the night never descends into darkness and quiet. I believe human beings evolved, and I think there's lots of evidence for this, that human beings evolved, and for the greatest part of our existence up until the rise of city-states and the development of agriculture about 10,000 years ago, we probably operated in bands that looked something like, 30 to 60 people, that kind of thing, but who were affiliated together and would sometimes come together in much bigger groups, such as we were familiar with many of the Native Americans doing. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting piece of anecdotal research where somebody recently tested for those people who continue to sell Christmas cards. The question was, well, how many people do you actually send Christmas cards to? And this number of 37 to 40 to 42 became that kind of standard metric, right? So we are still thinking about, perhaps there is a limitation on the number of really meaningful social interactions we can have with human beings in our lives, Randy. At one time, they were close to us. They lived in the same village, and we traveled together and hunted together and buried our dead together and celebrated birth together and all those kinds of things. But maybe now it is still a part of that reflects and refracts in modern society. But it is interesting indeed, isn't it, that this number comes up. And that goes back, of course, to lots of my comments about how our biology of the past plays out in today's, with fireplaces and sleeping upstairs and all the rest of the things that we've talked about. So, I think there's no doubt that I want this work to be scientifically rigorous enough, and it will be, to be published and to be viewed as legitimate, and in that sense to be simply a knowledge product that's out there for people to run with and do what they like with, challenge, embellish, find new ways of exploring. But I make no bones about the fact that I advocate for certain kinds of ways of life. I have no doubt that my childhood and where I grew up in this wild and beautiful place of Newfoundland gave me, in some ways, little choice, although not all of us who come from there have the same passion for these things as I do, but there it is. And I have witnessed firsthand the kinds of people, the kinds of communities, the kinds of traditions, that emanate from those kinds of circumstances, and those kinds of circumstances heavily embrace sustainable use of nature as a way of making a living. All nature, fish, fowl, timber, soil, whatever. We made our way independently of anybody bringing us our food in the main. And I've witnessed firsthand what kind of societies this raises, this creates. And every time I'm brought to a rural society anywhere in the world, whether I'm in Spain, whether I'm in Bavaria, whether I'm in Namibia, whether I am here in the United States or in other parts of Canada, it doesn't matter. I can fit in those communities so easily. There is no awkward transition whatsoever. That's the way it works. So I want to advocate for these kinds of activities because I'm not just a hunter who hunts. I'm somebody who has studied this as a scientist and as a biologist, and therefore I understand the evolutionary and biological implications. And the biological implications for health, for what we need to be healthy human beings, I understand that. Just as I advocate for religious perspectives, I was raised a Roman Catholic by two devout parents in Catholicism. My mother was from Dublin, Ireland, and so she was more than devout. But, you know, my personal spiritual views center much more on nature and center much more on a kind of druid kind of approach. I believe in deep knowledge, and I believe in a deep understanding of ourselves as immersed components in nature, and that's where the greatest intellectual, spiritual, and physical health derives. So I don't stand up there and pump, as you know, and say everybody should be a hunter, or everybody should be an angler, or everybody should be a berry picker, or everybody should do this. But let me be clear that I believe that those activities and other activities in nature, not just those, are absolutely critical for taking little humans and turning them into good humans. And I think it's possible to take little humans and make them into good humans without that, but I think it's a hell of a lot easier to create really good humans from little humans if they have a lot more experience in those circumstances. It is not an accident that when 9/11 happened in your country, that 70 to 80% of the transcontinental flights landed in Newfoundland, and that all of those people, sometimes more people than actually existed in our own communities, were taken in, were given the cabins in the country, were fed on moose meat, were given their quads to move around from place to place, that barbecues were lifted off anybody's veranda and moved to a place to feed people. I mean, this is what's been dramatized, you know, in the Come From Away play that's been shown on Broadway, has been shown in London, and so on and so forth. The reason that unlimited generosity that goes beyond one's capacity to even give, the reason that kind of thing emerges in people, I am fundamentally convinced, emerges from them because they have this sense of community and this sense of rurality. It would be much harder to imagine if those planes had all landed in, I don't know, some major city somewhere in the world, that we would still have people with such bonds of friendship that the American survivors travel every year to Newfoundland or bring the Newfoundland families to visit them, or that Americans who were on those flights have established scholarships for Newfoundland children to actually attend universities and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I believe nature is all, and I believe we're all natural. It's just that we need to be with nature to bring that part of ourselves to complete fruition. And one beautiful way of doing that, ultimately, is to consume nature herself, bring it into our bodies, and make it part of the systems that make us work.
Agreed. Jane, you've told me with the Wild Harvest Initiative, you want to communicate a new value for wildlife and the wild harvest. How can you do that?
Well, I think that we have come to understand wildlife in a certain way, and part of that has been just having wildlife with us. We view that as valuable to see it, for example, as we drive the roads or visit parks or whatever it might be. And we have valued wildlife as, for want of a better word, or maybe it's the appropriate word, as a target of hunting, or a target of fishing. But I think we have yet to step back and think about this idea that really what we have now acquired is this food, and that is really the kind of ultimate valuation that we ought to be making.
Yeah.
We start with valuations out here when we really ought to be perhaps starting with the evaluations more towards the end of the process. And I think there's lessons in that are important. People often say, that men tended to do all the hunting, but it's great that women are now getting involved in hunting more. If you were to ask a native community tribe did women participate in the hunt, they would think that was a pretty stupid question.
Yeah, they would. They'd look at you funny.
Yeah, I mean, when the animals may have been killed by males, but of course the idea of the hunt was the pursuit, was the capture, was the kill, was the butchering, was the cooking, and was the consumption. And the butchering and the cooking and the consumption and all of the elaborate stuff that took place in that part of what is hunting, that was very, very heavily directed by, controlled by, handled by females, women in those communities. And I always felt that it was a terrible way to discuss hunting, to sort of presume that it ended with the kill, which of course is a lot of how it has been projected in the literature many, many, many times.
Right.
But I think what we're trying to do here is to really turn that around and say, the hunt is everything from the conceiving to the search to the kill, which is the capture, of course, the obsession, and then the butchering and the returning and the cooking and the eating. The hunt does not stop when the animal dies. It does not stop when the animal is butchered. It stops, in a sense, if it ever stops, with the consumption of the animal. And that's a new way of looking at things that I think would be very helpful if we could adopt it.
Yeah. Someone like me who has platforms, has outreach, spends our day with all of our people here trying to communicate messages.
Yep.
How will you at Wild Harvest, all this data you're bringing forth, this new way of looking at landscapes, looking at the hunt as something way broader than what's previously been communicated or impressed on people, what will be that outreach, that communication? Will associations and partnerships like you and I have, or you have with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation or Wild Sheep, or some of your IUCN and others, is that all going to be not end, but a path that can be followed?
Yes, absolutely. So we spent the first 5 years or so really organizing all of this, dealing with the first years of data, trying to figure out what the problems were, seeing whether we could get these surveys done in the States, how best to build the database, who best to build the database. When you're dealing with 60 government agencies, there is a lot of work. It is. There's a lot of work to do. Yeah. But this second phase that we're now coming up onto, which was always the plan, we have ironed out all of those bullets, and so we are now, first of all, going to have the data for 5 years that we can talk about explicitly, which is going to allow us to make comparisons by species across ranges and for many species across ranges, or to look at many species within a range. That range could be a state, it could be 3 adjacent states, it could be a comparison between Canada and the United States. But it's not just the data that's going to be made available. We are analyzing this data, interpreting this data, defining the trends, giving those not sound bites, they're more substantial than that, but outputs like that we will be providing to all of our partners, to our mailing lists, of course, to our Facebook people in whatever best way we can, and to any of the other platforms that hopefully we'll become better at, and hoping people like you will, of course, extend the reach of that by moving it out to your systems. But we will also be producing, articles that will be both popular and also scientific articles that would be peer-reviewed. We have plans for we continue to do small films. We call them vignettes, 6, 12-minute little things. But we have plans for producing some really high-class films on this, about this whole idea of wild foraging in modern times, or that kind of conspectus. And I think there is a television show in this, Randy, to be perfectly honest about. I think there really is. This can lead us into a way of exploring things that would be very acceptable to a very wide audience. I think you could see that yourself, how that could work. And I think book publishing out of this is another thing that could easily take place. But we work very much in a collaborative way with our partners, and we have fantastic partners. And so some of these final decisions will be made in consultation with them and with the new partners that we're bringing in to this. I mean, the fact that we've kept this going and at the same time are increasing the partnership, I think is pretty strong evidence in its own right that we are onto something that's fairly significant, right? So there will be a lot of product, and of course we're going to be, as a result of this series that we're doing together, you are going to be moving product from this through your platforms. We in Conservation Visions are going to be moving them through our platforms, and we in Conservation Visions will hope our partners will do the same, and I'm really hoping that Randy will try to use as much reach as he has to move this through as well. So there will be a lot of product coming out of this, Randy.
And that's what I'm hoping for, because I get to interact with a lot of scientists and researchers because I'm interested in it, and I try my best to communicate that. And very often I get some hesitancy of scientists to, well, I'm not a communicator. I did this good work, but I'm just not a communicator. And I often say, well, what if Darwin wrote Origin of Species and said, I don't know people like this, and he just put it on a shelf, never to be seen. You think of the path, the change the path of the world took, because all of a sudden somebody came with a new look, a new lens through which to see problems we've struggled with. And that's why I try to encourage people who are in those spaces, who are looking at these problems in a complex way. Let's communicate those. Let's take the values that we as a society express and take the work you're doing, and how do we communicate that to people who value it? And so
it has to be moved. It simply has to be. There's no question about that. Otherwise, it's dead in the water. Right. I totally agree.
The best story in the world is still no good if it's never told.
That's absolutely true.
So, in today's world, where it seems like we just want to be this binary, I'm for, I'm against. You're this, I'm that. It seems like we're missing these opportunities to build allies and find these natural connections with people who they don't have to think exactly like us or us like them.
No.
I just feel that we're in this time where we miss so much opportunity. And I think, as you've expressed about food as kind of this core, this wild harvest, it seems like you're thinking about a lot of other alliances that just are so helpful and natural.
Well, I think there are a lot of alliances that can come around food, and I think there are a lot of alliances that can come from the diverse communities that are interested in food, who you might not normally otherwise interact with. And I think there's also a community of potential supporters for this activity from, let's say, from industry, for example, that might be a little hesitant to support something that, let's say, might be pure hunting or something of this nature. But I think if they are shown what we are trying to develop with the wild harvest, I really think it's incredibly inoffensive to the vast majority of people. It is meant to be extraordinarily inclusive. And I have always believed that we could build an inclusive community. This whole idea I developed of the conservation necklace, where we would build a community by placing nearest neighbors together and then building it out across the necklace in that way, till ultimately we got from the top to the bottom organizations that were very much opposed to one another, but because they were close enough to these more closely aligned entities along the way, they could be brought into this. I believe this conservation necklace idea is a pretty powerful kind of symbol of where we might want to get, recognizing that we will keep our differences, but recognizing that we must have a way to make our differences work together for the betterment of conservation. So no, I'm very much aware and very hopeful that the Wild Harvest Initiative will be an alliance builder, and I am trying to find new partners all the time that are different and that will expand the sort of cultural makeup, if you will, of the partnership that we have. And as I mentioned before, we are seriously considering making some inroads, significant inroads into the European and Southern African spaces, which of course will inevitably bring a much more diverse array of players to the table. And I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
As we've talked over the last however long we've been having these discussions, in my mind, I see the way you're looking at this, and I've had the benefit of our discussions since you started this, but there's a lot of research out there about the theory of change, theories of disruption, stuff like that. I see this look at landscapes as producers of wild harvest as a disruptive, a new change. And no matter how you look at all these theories of adoption and disruption and change, they might say, this Shane Mahoney guy, he is a radical. But you know what? It seems like you're undeterred by whatever.
Well, I've been a radical in certain aspects of my career. I think that's fair to say. I try to envisage ideas that other people are not dealing with, because that seems to be the way to make progress, to have as many people working on new ideas as possible, not everybody working on the same one. I'm radical in the ways that I think I'm radical in the way that I feel unhindered in expressing viewpoints that I know not everyone will like to hear, even though I don't make those comments to offend people. I know that everybody does not like to hear the fact that I believe that all animals are equal and that I fundamentally believe that human beings are simply just another animal. I know that that offends some people because they have told me so, that it offends them. When I say that losing an animal that I have loved is equal to losing a human being that I have loved, that offends a lot of people, or some people. But it is the truth of my life. It's how I have experienced life. When I say that I think hunting has been on the wrong track for a long time in glorifying the hunter and failing to glorify the animal, that has offended lots of people, particularly people who have perhaps big trophy rooms or things of this nature. But I firmly believe that that is absolutely true, and I think it is the wrong way to promote hunting, and I don't think it's a fair evaluation of the participants. I don't think there's that much remarkable about a human being who can be taught to squeeze a trigger and kill an animal at a distance of 100, 200, 300, 400, or 500 yards, and then the best we can say is we spent 5 days out in our tent and then we packed the animal out, compared with the capacities of the animals we hunted, which live on that land forever. So I have positions like that not everybody agrees with. I was a very early critic of the imagery that was being shown at hunting conventions and in hunting magazines. I was very critical of the idea that we should take our money, and as soon as someone from the anti-hunting community criticizes a hunter, we should spend all our money tracking down and fighting that individual. I was completely opposed to those kinds of ideas, which were fairly mainstream at one point in time. I believe that predators are a beautiful and wonderful product of our circumstances, and that we should be so absolutely proud that we have been, through one means or another, been able to bring wolves and grizzly bears into spaces where they once existed and where they have not for a long period of time. And that, that aggravates some people. I don't mean to do that, but that's not my intention. But I know it's going to do that in many ways. I feel that we have to develop a much more empathetic, much deeper understanding of what happened between us and indigenous North Americans, if we are ever to have some chance of rapprochement, in the sense that we can work together on efforts like the Wild Harvest initiatives, and build trust and be able to get there while recognizing the true history of what went on. That doesn't settle well with lots of people. You hear comments, well, we fought a war, we won, blah, blah, blah. There it is.
Get over it.
Yeah. So I think those views, I think, are radical, I guess, in some ways. But I think overall what's perhaps most radical is I don't really fit anywhere. There's lots of communities that like parts of Shane. Maybe there's some communities that like a lot of Shane, but by and large, there's always two communities that have a certain amount of tension around Shane, and it's always been the way throughout my career. And maybe it's a personality flaw, or maybe it is just that I have this strong sense that what I believe in, I speak about. Every lecture I have ever given has been a free-flowing lecture. I do not use notes for my lectures. I never have in the hundreds and hundreds that I have given. I speak only about what I believe in, and I speak often with a direct passion for those things that, again, sometimes people are suspect of. A lot of times people really love it, really like it. Mm-hmm. But I think that now I am asking for people to consider, I'm asking them to consider revolutionizing their own thinking. Not just the hunting community, but the conservation community in general, people in federal and state agencies, people in elected government, people in every other walk of life. I really am asking people to think about, is it not possible to really now, in this decade, to develop a brand new vision of our place in the world, and to bring people to that. I can only do that if I have a lot of help, Randy. Yeah. That can't be done without a lot of lift. And maybe I'll never get that lift, and therefore I can only keep trying to push it as much as I possibly can. But Wild Harvest is a culmination of a lot of thinking. Yeah. And it sounds at the surface a kind of a simple thing. Well, how much meat and fish do we gather, by recreational hunting and angling? But as we have discovered over the hours of discourse over this now, there are many, many, many layers to this, and many, many potential implications. And if they scale up collectively, I do believe that it will be a radical change in how we approach conservation.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times the human tribalism builds barriers just for their own comfort. Yeah. And they're not truly barriers. No. It seems that the idea of food and the connection food brings us to conservation and productive wild landscapes is a pretty good wrecking ball to knock down some of those manufactured barriers that we want to put around our own little tribes and communities.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that's true. And sometimes wrecking balls can be, can wear very soft gloves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this Wild Harvest initiative can. We're simply asking people here to reflect more. Reflect on the values of the things that we collectively gather from nature in our highly industrialized, highly advanced, incredibly wealthy societies. Just asking us to step back for a moment and think about all the people for the moment who berry pick and who gather fruits and nuts and antlers and meat and fish and plants and so on. And just think about all of those people, and they all live somewhere, and they all have little humans, and they all have jobs, and they all talk to other people, and so on and so forth. And so much of this is easily accessible to people. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't have to be a mountaineer to figure out how to, you know, pick blueberries.
Yeah.
Or to find mushrooms. They got to get a little bit of knowledge about what ones to eat and what not to eat.
Yeah.
I really believe that it is, if it could be taken on, even in one state or one province first, and said, yeah, we really are going to make this a priority. We're really going to examine the lands we have, the wildlife we have, the water we have, the restorative landscape approaches that we're capable of enacting, the large gatherings where we could bring people together around wild harvest. You know, a major convention in Montana that just talked about all the wild harvesting that goes on and so forth. You know,
yeah.
I mean, I think this is the way that it becomes contagious. Again, I come back to the North American model when I first started speaking about the model in the late 1990s, early part of 2000. I mean, you know, it was really not known by very many people, and now it is embedded in many of our systems, and I hope that one day this Wild Harvest Initiative is going to be the same.
Yeah. I'm confident it will, Shane.
Well,
I
thank you for that, and I hope you're right.
No, it just, maybe it's because of my bias of growing up so connected to the landscapes and the food and the way of life it provided me. So, thinking about anytime you're working on a big project like this, and I don't want to tie you to any timelines, but for the listener or for the viewer, do you have any markers out there that you think you're comfortable saying, here's when you can expect to see some of this, here's when you can start measuring what progress we're making?
We do. I mean, in part, we are already there in some ways, in the sense that the harvest data for 14, 15, 15, 16 for all states and provinces and all species, that has all been entered into the database, and that is there. We can immediately start to give projections based on that data. We wanted to wait until we had 5 years because it was simply a better standard for making sure that what we had was realistic. Mm-hmm. It wasn't some fluke of 1 year or something overpowering things. We have already, through the course of this, released a considerable amount of information through Facebook, through articles in Field and Stream, Forest and Stream, Sports of Field, The Wildlife Professional, and other things that are, by the way, available to anyone who wishes to get them. We have released a large number of small films that have dealt directly with the Wild Harvest Initiative that we are working on. We have developed a major report on the Wild Harvest Initiative based on those first 2 years of data, which was submitted to the Convention on Biodiversity, which was accepted by them as a supplementary paper to look at the harvesting of wild foods through recreational hunting and fishing in the temperate zones of the world. We have produced 6 fact sheets as examples of what we will do for all species, you know, on moose, on whitetails, on bear, on turkey, and on mule deer, I think, at this point in time. They're all finalized and produced, and they're out there. They're available on the websites. They can be picked up. They can be used. They will all be totally revised when we bring in this 5 years of extra data, but nevertheless, people can see them and use them, and it states clearly this is 14, 15, 15, 16 data. We're able to show that information and harvest by state. You know, so we already have what we'll call is an enormous reservoir of information, and what we have done is trickled out small amounts of it to the broader public. We release press releases when we bring in new partners, so people know the partnership is expanding and all of that kind of thing. So we have done a fair bit, and we actually have a book that records, you know, a bound book that we give to people to show the many things that we've already done. But now we are entering, once we complete the capture of this 5 years of data, which we believe will be by this fall, by September, we will believe two major things will happen. We will release a major document, the ultimate document on recreational fishing harvests in Canada. It will be the most definitive piece of work that's ever been done in that country, and that will be a big line will be drawn under that part of the project, and then we'll start to export that information out through various ways, papers, documents, maybe a film, certainly through social media platforms and so on. And then we are going to start to release the cumulative data, combining the data for the 5 years of harvest data from 2014 up to 2020. That will go on, of course. We'll go on to gather more later years of data, including the COVID years. But with that 5 years of data, we're going to draw a line there, and we're going to start to come out with our fact sheets for all species. That will be for all 5 years. We'll also then be giving our first economic valuation. This total amount of food is worth, this many $1 billion, and it's generated this many meals for this many people over this period of time. So the economic evaluation of the harvest we have will already be provided. We'll then be working on the issue of how we contextualize that for food security in both our countries. And we will be starting the very technically difficult question of trying to decide, what it would really take to replace this wild harvest, if hunting and angling were to disappear. So I think you're realistically looking at, first of all, people should understand they can come to our websites and they can get a lot of information at this point in time. They cannot get directly into our database. That is under certain levels of control, as to who can get in there and manipulate that. But they can get a lot of outputs already that they're free to use. Mm-hmm. They're all free for them, and they're free to use them in any way, shape, or form. And I encourage them to do that. And I encourage them to spread the word with any of the social media work that we are doing. And I also encourage them to stand by, because we will have this 5 years of data compilation very soon. And of course, we have now completed and reported on, but they're still in the hands of the state agencies. They have to approve that these can be released. We have completed hunter survey, meat sharing surveys in Texas, Wyoming, Arizona, Nevada, and Alaska. And my view was that when we have 5 states, and especially if there's variability amongst them culturally and so on, we will now do a synthetic review of what that looks like, and we will be releasing all of that information as well. Again, we're going to continue to gather more of those surveys in more states, to continue to build up this information. And then it's the big, as I said, technical question that we have to turn our minds to, which is this question of, okay, now we know how much food is being produced in the last 5 years, let's say, for hunting. And we are also gathering the historical data as best we can on a pace whenever we can, because there's a lot of historical data we can use previous to 2014. We're now going to start focusing in the next perhaps 12 to 18 months on this very complicated question of what it would take to replace that wild food. What are the social, economic, and environmental costs and challenges associated with replacing all of that wild harvest if, under a frightening, theoretical circumstance, hunting and angling disappeared. Yeah. So we actually have a lot of information that people can have access to. We're going to have an awful lot more, I would say, within this fall. And of course, we expect that by December, we are going to be making big announcements. We will be announcing the U.S. Forest Service partnership, but we are anticipating making some big announcements about new international players who will be coming to join this Wild Harvest Initiative and moving it onto a global scale. So a lot of work has already been done, Randy. But your question is an important one, because a lot of people may not see these products. We don't see everything, right? Yeah. I can send it out. Not you might be traveling, you might see it. You know, those things happen.
Yeah.
So it may be that many people have not seen all the things that we have put out so far. But believe me, we've got a lot to show them, and we're only too happy to do it. So
well,
they should get in touch with us.
People like me can help you with that.
You certainly can, and I hope you will.
Yeah.
Yep.
You started on another thing that, you know, we're getting close to the end here. We've talked so much about this in the context of the U.S. and Canada, North American model. Mm-hmm. We've talked about it, you know, how all this is going to have impacts for hunters, non-hunters, maybe anti-hunters, state and provincial agencies. Mm-hmm. But there's also a big part of this that we really haven't touched on much is outside of North America. Mm-hmm. We have councils on biological diversity. We have, there's all kinds of places where you are engaged.
Oh, yeah.
I know you spend a ton of time on these more global efforts.
I do.
Where is this going to play with those?
Well, the preoccupation, first of all, wild meat harvesting is a huge topic, which is very encouraging for these international conventions. They have traditionally focused on tropical and subtropical regions, as I mentioned at one point in time. And they, you know, and that was understandable because they were trying to deal with biodiversity hotspots and also places where a lot of, you know, indigenous peoples who were still practicing their lifestyles occurred. Yeah. Amazonia, the Congo Basin, etc. But the fact that they were focusing on this already allowed me to interject and say, well, that's fantastic work. But you're really only getting a tip of the iceberg because there is a massive harvest of wild meat by recreational hunters in Canada, the United States, and in Mexico, but also in you know, huge parts of Europe. And collectively, that is a massive harvest of wild meat. And it does have relevancies to biodiversity conservation and conservation in general, you know, plans and methodologies and approaches that have been developed to allow this sustainable pattern of use, which is exactly what you are looking to find to ensure that the sustainable harvest or the harvest in tropical and subtropical areas can become sustainable. You're looking for models, essentially.
Yeah.
So I attended the Convention on Biodiversity in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt 4 or 5 years ago, and we made a major push there, myself and a consortium of organizations called the Cooperative Partnership in Sustainable Wildlife Management, to actually get the wording changed, first of all, to say that the convention was accepting, you know, studies on wild meat harvesting and procurement and the challenges and benefits and all that in tropical and subtropical areas, and would now be seeking supplementary information, I'm paraphrasing, in other regions of the world. Mm-hmm. That opened up the opportunity for Conservation Visions to provide our first overview report on methodologies and preliminary results to the Convention on Biodiversity, and that document has been accepted, and you can find it within the web space of the Convention on Biodiversity. So we have already made the first inroad by getting our work acceptable to them. Now what we have to do is to start, to the very question you have, exploding this data out, packaging this data out in ways that will make it even more relevant to them, and bearing in mind, of course, that when we bring recreational hunting and angling harvests to something like the Convention on Biodiversity, it gives us another very strong reason for being able to argue for its legitimacy, and makes it more difficult for those who may be opposed to the activities to argue that it is illegitimate. But it also is a Trojan horse for bringing the entire North American model and approach into these discussions. Yeah. Because I firmly believe we have an incredible story to tell to the world about how not only we sustainably use wildlife, but remember that we came from a place where wildlife was decimated. We instituted policies and programs that recovered it. We instituted policies and programs that allowed us to utilize those species and still maintain and continue to recover those species. And we reach a point today, of course, where this program, the Wild Harvest Initiative, is living testimony to the successes that we have had because we can harvest this amount of wild food in a sustainable way from populations that 100 years ago, might have disappeared entirely. So you see the connections that I'm bringing. But I am heavily involved with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the Convention on Biodiversity, CITES, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species, and I am an IUCN representative to a group that's called the Cooperative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management. So they're all in favor of sustainable wildlife management, very important. And the 14 entities include Traffic, CITES, IUCN, the International Institute for Economic Development, FAO, which is the Federation of Agricultural Organizations, OIE, the International Body for Animal Diseases. It just goes on. I mean, these are the powerhouses of the world. The CIC is represented there, the International Council for the Conservation of Wildlife, and it's a limited club, if you will, of 14 of the most impactful organizations with tremendous reach, and they've come together in support of sustainable wildlife use. That's the only reason we exist. Yeah. And I'm there, of course, to champion the IUCN position, which is itself in support of sustainable use, but also, of course, to interject things like this that are more about our North American experience. Yeah. So I spend probably a third of my waking moments on those aspects of things. Yeah.
And that's for someone like me who
it's another world.
Yeah, it's another world that I don't get into.
But they're important worlds.
That's my point. Is just because I'm not there doesn't mean it's not important. Doesn't mean it's not
impact you directly.
Exactly.
Right?
Anyone who doubts that those issues, those values, those activities don't impact me does not read their news feed.
Exactly.
Does not understand some of the recent historical events that.
That's very, very, very true.
So I'm glad that you are that involved and that the Wild Harvest Initiative will be that integral to some of the ideas
We've come a long way in the last 5 years to getting it. I mean, these are complicated processes. You don't just simply show up with your little postcard and they have to do it. We won't belabor that at this point.
Yeah. Shane? We've covered so many great things, and I know this is just the first of many sessions that we're going to hopefully be able to talk about as more and more data is out there and you're more comfortable with the peer review. But in the interim, how do people find out about Shane Mahoney, Conservation Visions, Wild Harvest Initiative?
Well, they can turn on their Googler, as my friend says, and they can search my name, and that's one way to reach it. But the better way to reach it is to look for conservationvisions.com, which will bring them to my organization, and there will be discussions of many things, not just Wild Harvest, but also my research publications and the other things I do internationally. But it will also touch upon Wild Harvest. And then there is the Wild Harvest Initiative website itself, which is wildharvestinitiative.com. And they will be able to find all the things that are there. And ultimately, we are developing 2 brand new websites as we speak. Again, learning from the questions of accessibility on our old websites. How do they work and how do people make use of them? And we really want in the Wild Harvest or in the Conservation Visions web space, I have what I'm calling and told the developers I want as a digital library. So every publication of mine, every book chapter, every peer-reviewed paper, every popular article, etc., they will all be there, and of course people will be able to extract those if they're interested, and they're all under nice headings and so on. And then in the Wild Harvest Initiative website, of course, there will be all these categories of explaining what it is, of course, and then explaining what the database is, providing the fact sheets and providing the list and links to the films and links to Facebook and YouTube and all those kinds of things. Yeah. And that is going to be a very robust heavily data-weighted platform once we start to move all of this information, into space. And you've mentioned a couple of things in our conversations, Randy, that I'd like to follow up with you on briefly after this. That might be other ways, that other things we might add to help get our work out.
Yeah. Well,
so that'll be great, and I'll appreciate that very much, as I always do, your assistance.
Yeah, and I look at how big your Facebook page is for Conservation Visions, and you're moving into other spaces, YouTube and mailing lists and stuff. So anyone watching or listening, I hope they'd either get their Googler out and put Shane Mahoney in there, or they would go to conservationvisions.com or wildharvestinitiative.com and learn more.
Or hopefully come to your spaces and find a lot more about it. You're going to be sharing all this.
I will be sharing every bit of it, Shane. Yeah. It's that important to me. It's that important to the mission and the vision of what we have for our company, that wild places, wild things, wild harvest, and how we as a society and culture benefit from that and are dependent on that is at the core of what we do here. So It's a great fit. Shane, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate all your work.
As always. It's been great. Thank you.